CORS errors can be really frustrating until you understand exactly what is happening. So let's dive deep with an example designed specifically to demystify the CORS process. So if you don't know what CORS is a security feature of the browser that helps protect websites from having code injected that sends sensitive data to someone else's web server. And so it is important, but it's really annoying when we are the one who controls the web server and we actually want the request to go through to a different domain for whatever reason. And CORS has two different modes, and it depends on what type of request you're making, which one gets triggered. The simplest mode is pretty straightforward. The browser sends a request, the server sends a response, and then the browser checks if that response has certain headers that will allow it to go through. That one happens on very simple requests, but it's actually really common to trigger the second mode, which is a mode that includes what's called a pre-flight request. And a pre-flight request means that the browser sends a options request first before it even makes your real request. And the server needs to respond correctly to that options request, or else the client will not even attempt to make the real request and you'll still get an error message. So let's walk through both of those with a real world web server. Now, here's our two web servers. We have two because we need one to host the API on port 8080 and one to host the client on port 8081. If we take a look at the HTML that's being served on port 8081, it runs some JavaScript when the DOM content is loaded that makes a fetch request to the API. And for now, we're just going to do a GET request. This will trigger that first simple mode of CORS. And let's take a look at how to fix our CORS error for that situation. Now, to fix that error, we'll go into our server, take a look at what it's doing. We see that it's responding to GET requests here with some JSON that says this request succeeded. And if everything was working, we would expect this data to actually be appended as an H1 tag to the body of the website. And we know it's not, we're still getting an error. So if we go back to the browser real quick, let's take a closer look at this error. It says the error has been, the request has been blocked by CORS policy, no access control allow origin. And since this is one of those one-phase CORS situations, the only thing we need to do is actually add this request or this response header to the response. So back in the server, we can set a header, and the header we want to set is access control allow origin. And now the value here needs to be something that the browser will consider a match for the client host. And so it can either be the exact name of the client host, which in our case is localhost 8081. Or you can also use wildcards here. So we could put a star, and a star would match every other host. And that's a little permissive. Sometimes you do want to do that if you're writing a public API. But in our case, let's be specific. Let's just say anytime the request origin is localhost 8081, I want to set this, I want to tell CORS that that's allowed, right? So let's restart our server. Once that is going, we can refresh and see that CORS is now allowing that request to succeed. And that is essentially this workflow here, where all you need to do is make sure that the response headers for this GET request match. And now they do. Okay, that's the simplest case. Unfortunately, it's very common to trigger this second case. For example, any request that has a content type like application JSON, which you very often do in API requests, you're going to get this workflow. So let's go into our client and see how we can trigger that. And let's just kind of pretend it's a post request. This would actually still trigger the pre-flight request even on a GET request if we add this header, but yeah, let's just for reality sake pretend it's a post request. So we're going to set the content type header to be application JSON, which really is telling the server to expect that there's going to be some request body of JSON here. We don't need to add the body to trigger the pre-flight request, so we won't, just to minimize the example. But now that we've added this header, we restart the client. We'll leave the server as is. We don't need the browser, refresh, and all of a sudden we're back to a broken state where we're not getting data. So we know that we already added the header, so it's obvious we need to do more than that. Let's look at the network response and see what's going on here. Sort of suspiciously, now there's 2 requests. Look at this one, it's a pre-flight request, and that is status 405. That's suspicious. We'll find out why that is in a minute. And then our actual API request doesn't even have response headers, which essentially means this second request never actually happened. It got short-circuited by the failure of this pre-flight request. So back to the server. Now on the server, if you'll remember, our error message said that we got a 405 response. That's interesting. That means that the server did respond with something. And we don't exactly know what. We're not console logging anything here for it. But if you look at the code, that actually makes sense. So like I said, the pre-flight request is actually a request of type options, which means we got to the switch statement, checked if it was a GET, it wasn't, checked if it was a post, it wasn't, and we triggered this default case. The default case simply throws an error invalid request method, and this is a constant for the status 405. So let's handle that options request method and see what that does for us. To do that, we can just add a case here at the top, and let's try for now just responding with a 200 OK response. And we can do that with writing a header, status OK. Give that a quick save, restart the server, and then go back to the browser and try giving that a run. Still not working, but we are a little closer. This first request is now giving us a 200 response, so something has changed. Let's go and look at the error message and see what else it's complaining about. So now instead of saying that the pre-flight request failed, it's actually complaining about a new header value, and it's this access control allow headers in pre-flight response. All right, so let's go back to our server and add that header in. Now, if you read the error message closely, you'll notice it said in the pre-flight response, which is this options one, which means we really only need it to be set when we're sending back the options response. All the headers set up here will actually be set for everything. If we set a header inside of here, it will just be for the options response. You could actually do it either place, but just for demonstration purposes, I'm gonna set that here for the options request specifically. So we need to set a header This time it's, oops, it is access control allow headers. And for the value is kind of obvious from the wording. It's which headers do we want to allow in the request? And so we need to allow the content type header. Okay, so now if we restart the server again, go back to our page and reset it, it works. And now we're handling both of our flows here. So we saw how to do the GET request. That was pretty easy. We just had to add the access control allow origin header, and that got us through like the simple one-step flow. And then in order to get through this second step flow, we added the ability for our server to handle the options request type on the same endpoint, by the way, as the endpoint the post request came through on. And that is important. So you'll need like your server to respond to this options request type for any endpoint you have. In our case, there was only one, but just something good to know. And then by setting the allowed headers here, we were able to pass this check, which made the pre-flight request pass. And then once the pre-flight request passed, it made our post request and everything went through. And that's really all there is to it. Now, I know if you're not using Go, the tutorial won't exactly apply, but I will add that GitHub repository to the notes if you want to refer to it. Pretty much every web framework or language where you can write a web server has a way to set the headers. So hopefully this sort of like illuminates what's going on and you can apply the knowledge to whatever language you're using. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.